Another year has gone by and we've had a bunch of new decks, as well as some previous contenders from last year make a huge impact on the game in 2023. Today we'll be going over some of the best decks of the year based on how well they did at major events, focusing on big tournaments like the Yugioh Championship Series, or YCS for short, as well as the National and Continental World Championship Qualifiers, WCQ for short, and even the first World Championship we've had since 2019. Now let's get started. And at number 10 on this list we have Purrely. This is an Xyz based archetype that revolves around the effect of Purrely and Purrely, which each have an effect that dig for other Purrely cards, most notably Purrely quick play spells. Purrely itself by excavating to search for any Purrely card, and Purrely by accessing non-quick play options like My Friend Purrely, a continuous spell that works to search Purrely cards and refills your hand with them if your opponent answers your Purrely monsters. The quick play spells are the most important, as while they each have a minor primary effect and powerful secondary effects when used as an Xyz material, but their primary function is to be an emergency teleport style effect, meaning each card searches out Purrely and Purrely, thus searching you more cards. This does come with a discard to summon the Purrelys, but that's a small price to pay for this much value and consistency. With Purrely itself not having a once per turn on its effects, this lets the deck keep summoning Purrely and Purrely multiple times a turn, so long as it can keep up the materials in hand to pay for the discard cost of the quick play spells. Purrely and Purrely can both set up specific rank 2 Xyz monsters by combining with particular memory quick play spells. For instance, Purrely can use a Purrely Delicious Memory in your hand to Xyz into a Purrely Plump. And there's a different Purrely Xyz monster for each Purrely spell. Purrely Noir and Purrely Sleepy Memory, Purrely Beauty with Purrely Pretty Memory, and Purrely Happiness with Purrely Happy Memory. Each of the quick play spells also imparts special effects onto the Xyz monsters they're attached to, like how Sleepy Memory lets you draw cards during your opponent's standby phase if it's attached. All of the Purrely rank 2s can attach more quick play spells to them with their effects, with Plump being the best at stacking up a ton of materials. All of this is to concentrate several Xyz materials into one big bad boss monster, Purrely Noir, an unaffected tower style monster when it has 5 or more materials, and has a non-once per turn ability to send any card in your opponent's field or graveyard to the bottom of the deck by detaching 2 of its materials. Purrely is a very involved and unique deck, and ever since the archetype got its full lineup of cards release, it's been one of the strongest threats in the game. Purrely's existence alone has led to the resurgence of boss monster removal cards like Kaijus and even Herald of the Abyss, just because decks can't be caught without a way to beat Noir out of the field, or else they'll usually just forfeit the matchup. And even then, it's not so easy, as if you don't kill them the same turn, My Friend Purrely's recursion will completely restock their hand, and they can do it all over again. Purrely was strong enough to receive a limitation to its best extender, Purrely Delicious Memory, making it hard to set up Purrely Plump, the best rank 2 at snagging materials, and therefore the best at making a powerful Noir who can both be unaffected and have materials to spare for its insanely strong removal ability. Purrely has been a constant threat in the TCG, but really hasn't performed to the level people were expecting. It's only represented in major TCG wins, with 1/3 of the 3v3 YCS Sao Paulo winners playing it, and only has one more national championship in Belgium to its name for premier tournament success, despite being a constant feature in top cuts with over 30 YCS tops in its name that year. And while these lists do focus primarily on the TCG, Purrely gets a minor exception because over in the OCG, it won the 2 biggest tournaments of the year, winning the very competitive Asian and Japan Continental WCQs. While it's hard to get info on the OCG metagame sometimes, Purrely taking 2 of the biggest and most public OCG tournaments that even the TCG gets to hear about is a big deal, and enough to let Purrely just squeeze on this list for overall impact of the year. And at number 9, we have Floowandereeze. This is our first returning archetype from 2022, and the deck is still basically the same now as it was last year, with the only major change being the barrier Statue of the Stormwinds was banned for the entirety of the year. Floowandereeze is an archetype that revolves around chaining normal summons of monsters who have the effects to add other cards or other utility effects, all while avoiding special summoning of any kind. The primary starter cards are Robina and Eaglin, and with Magnificent Map and Advent of Adventure being archetypal cards to help get those starters out. Also, thanks to its lack of use of the extra deck or special summoning, Floowandereeze makes great use of powerful draw spells like Pot of Duality, Pot of Extravagance, and Pot of Prosperity to increase its consistency, as the deck is usually reliant on starting with Robina and needs as many ways to find it as possible. The deck's plan is bringing out its archetypal boss monster, Floowandereeze and M-Pen. This powerful penguin sets up a floodgate against attack mode special summon monsters and searches the mass interaction trap card Floowandereeze in Dreaming Town that can both flip all of your opponent's monsters face down and set another normal summon sequence on your opponent's turn. That ability to play on your opponent's turn lets Floowandereeze set up other Wingbeast boss monsters that the deck can search with Eaglin's effect. The two big ones are Mist Valley Apex Avian and Ryza the Mega Monarch. Apex Avian gives the deck Omni Negation to deal with basically anything, but is only one point of interaction, whereas Ryza can hit multiple cards in the field and the graveyard with its spin effect. Different bosses for different scenarios. Despite the metagame changing so much between years, Floowandereeze's type of interaction has always been generally effective against every deck. M-Pen doubles as both an answer to all Link monsters, or any monster that has to special summon in attack mode by preventing them from activating their effects. And Dreaming Town's Mass Book of Moon on your opponent's board can take care of anything that summons in defense mode most of the time. Book of Moon itself had a huge resurgence in play throughout the year due to one particular deck, and Floodgates rarely go out of style, letting Floowandereeze's unique combination of interactions survive the ever-swirling tides of the metagame. This was the case in 2022, where Flu was always a pretty solid Tier 1 or Tier 2 deck in basically every metagame, even Tier 0 ones. Flu's best showing this year was its win in YCS Cancun, and, like Purrely, was a pretty decently represented metagame threat at different parts of the year with over 30 major top appearances. It even had a resurgence later in the year with its good matchup against the new Unchained legacy support, making it a top deck as a Link deck that struggles to deal with N-Pen. There's not a whole lot to say about Flu. It's straightforward and pretty good at what it does, with or without the Bearer statue, and that helps it hold on to relevance for a second year in a row. And at number 8 on this list, we have Rikka Sunavalon, or just known as Plants. Another deck that made its big splash into the scene last year, but is a new addition to the list in 2023. Rikka Sunavalon is an incredibly powerful and even more technical combo deck, synergizing multiple plant archetypes as well as generic plant support like Lone Fire Blossom. The deck is notable for its ability to combo purely off of a single normal monster, Sunseed Genus Loci, being the necessary starter for the full Sunavalon Link combo through the interconnected Sunavalons and Sunvines, getting to the generic plant league enablers like Aro Severi Jasmine. Ostensibly, in a Row-Mage support card, Jasmine's requirements only needing plants and effects to search out any plant monster as a soft once per turn lets it access powerful secondary setups that even stretch outside of just the plant monsters, like searching Borea, who can in turn get the deck to access a powerful non-plant Omni-Negate with Regulus. The Rikka side of the deck provides more varied and staggered kinds of interactions, like its very powerful field spell, Rikka Cone, letting you sacrifice your opponent's monsters to resolve your effects instead of your own. Not too shabby when the decks can search Rikka Sheet, which works as a monster negate, and in tandem with Cone, contribute a second monster of your opponent's for cost, something you can't even respond to. Then there's Rikka Princess, giving the deck a monster effect negation from the graveyard or hand. These kinds of effects are crucial for the deck, as while the plant Link Climb can get you strong monster-based interactions like Regulus or Bagalancer the Resurgent, these secondary interactions help the combo still win through powerful board breakers like Dark Ruler No More. This one-card combo power and consistency paired with such great payoffs made Rikka one of the best hard combo decks of the year. Rikka's biggest splash last year was winning the European Continental WCQ, often called Euros, and the deck repeated the performance this year, but it supplemented that performance by even winning YCS Dortmund this year, giving it more notable success despite largely being the same deck it was last year where it barely missed the list. That could be in part because Rikka is notable as an extremely powerful combo deck that has a relatively small number of pilots compared to other archetypes. So while it is powerful, its results are few and far between. It has less than 20 major tournament tops this year, far less than other decks in this list, but still managed to take 2 of the biggest wins of the year in spite of that low representation. It's a powerful deck, but is equally difficult and unique to pilot, so it needs dedicated players in order to make the best use of it. But those few focused players managed to excel enough to get Rikka Sunavalon recognition on this list of one of the best decks of 2023. And at number 7, we have Runick. This is an archetype that revolves around its powerful field spell, Runick Fountain, and its ability to recycle the various Runick quick play spells, drawing up to 3 cards per use of the field spell, and with only a soft once per turn. The Runick quick play spells themselves are very versatile, coming equipped with removal effects and monster negation, searching for the rest of the Runick engine and all sorts of other effects, and resolving any of them banishes some number of cards to the top of your opponent's deck, giving the deck an alternate win condition considering using these quick plays also forces you to skip your battle phase. On top of that, every Runick quick play spell can special summon the various Runick fusion monsters from the extra deck in the extra monster zone. The most popular ones are Hyujin and Gary for their ability to search Runick Fountain and recur it from the graveyard, respectively, as well as having great secondary effects to protect your other cards from destruction with Yugioh, or punishing your opponent for attacking with Gary's Graveyard Trigger destruction effect. Runick in general is usually an archetype that performs at its best when paired with a secondary archetype or engine that benefits from the cheap special summons they provide, and can take advantage of the card draw power and controlling aspect of the deck. Last year, it mostly only saw success when paired with Spright, thanks to the ability to special summon a level 2 monster like Yugioh, relegating it to an honorable mention as just a Spright tech. And while it's still paired with Spright variants this year, even winning the Central American Continental WCQ in that variant, it had additional success above being the Robin to Spright's Batman. For instance, Runick was paired with Bestials, and a small engine of branded support cards like Guiding Quim the Virtuous and Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous, but not in the usual branded way of focusing on fusions. Instead, their status as tuners and their ability to set up following plays, whether it be Cartesia's ability to return to the hand or Quim's ability to access Cartesia, letting the deck play a comprehensive synchro toolbox to pair with the free special summons and star lines provided by the Runick fusions. With the Bestials and branded regain drawing cards off of Bestials and Runick banishes rounding out the synergies with more free bodies and more card draw. This setup won the last YCS of the year, YCS Bologna, and took Runick from honorable mention territory again to deserving its own spot on this list, racking up over 30 topping appearances on top of these wins in various shells. After all, even before the YCS win, it was a frequent topping contender when paired with the Naturia monsters earlier in the year, as another synchro enabling engine that paired well with Runick's. This version made it as far as second place in YCS Los Angeles, and might have had more success if not for the quick limitation of Naturia's Sacred Tree. This might have put Runick on the back burner for the rest of the year, if not for the Bestial Synchro version getting the late surprise win. Runick broke out of its shell as merely a tech option from 2022, firmly making it one of the best archetypes and decks of 2023. And arriving on the scene at number 6 on this list, we have Rescue Ace. This is a fire-based archetype revolving around the little machine Rescue Ace Hydrant, who is the primary starter that can set up summoning of the super powerful boss monster Rescue Ace Turbulence, a powerhouse of a card that can set 4 different Rescue Ace traps and quick play spells with a single effect, while itself having a retaliation destruction effect if another one of your cards is removed. 5 distinct pieces of interaction or follow-up all in one boss monster is truly a metagame warping setup, and each of these effects get powered up with Hydrant on the field. The best interaction is the trap card Contain and Extinguish. Contain is a monster effect negation that also stops the monster from attacking, and having Hydrant on the field locks that monster from extra plays too. Extinguish is a targeted monster removal, which can also lock the opponent out of using the effects of any extra copies of that monster with the same name if Hydrant's on the field. The usual quick play spells, Rescue and Alert, provide the deck follow-up and potential interaction with Alert, letting you add a Rescue Ace monster from graveyard to hand, or from deck to hand with Hydrant on the field. And with Rescue, special summoning a Rescue Ace monster from your graveyard, or with Hydrant boost, can special summon a monster from your opponent's graveyard to disrupt their plays. Both of these cards can even set up a Rescue Ace Preventer, giving the deck a Book of Moon style effect out of their quick play spells. But even with all this power, Rescue Ace wasn't super popular or effective with its initial wave of cards. The problem with the deck was needing consistent access to Hydrant, the starter that gets everything going. So Rescue Ace was banished to the depths of Rogue tier for a while. Very powerful when you set up, but just not consistent enough through hand traps. Then came the release of Diabellstar the Black Witch, and the Sinful Spoils archetype related to it. Diabellstar is a starter and extender that can special summon any level 1 fire monster like Hydrant thanks to searching out original Sinful Spoils Snake Eye, perfect for Rescue Ace, who now have a secondary engine with Diabellstar and her accomplished Sinful Spoil cards that could special summon their all-important little guy. And it gave the deck much needed follow-up, as Snake Eye could banish itself from the graveyard to add a level 1 fire monster from deck to hand, setting it up all over again. Considering Diabellstar came with her own search spell in Wanted Seeker of Sinful Spoils, suddenly Rescue Ace had 6 starters that special summoned Hydrant. Diabellstar and Sinful Spoils debut came with Rescue Ace immediately bursting into the top of the metagame, winning the very next YCS in Indianapolis. Not only did it win, it was both the first and second place deck in a mirror match for the finals. If it weren't for the fact that it took all the way until October for Diabellstar to come out and complete the Rescue Ace Sinful Spoils deck composition, Rescue Ace might be even higher on this list with more tournaments to compete in, as it came out after WCQ season was over and couldn't add any of those tournaments to its trophy case. It still has more than 30 tops despite this late mark on the scene, and more than all the previous decks on this list despite being much newer than all of them. Rescue Ace has been a game-defining deck for the last quarter of the year, and is still one of the best decks in the format that every other deck has to plan for. There's a very real chance, if it can dodge any major hits on the ban list, we'll be seeing it as a returning member of the list next year. And at number 5, we have Dragon Link. This is a deck that focuses largely on a bevy of generic dragon monsters in the main and extra deck to comprise a powerful and resilient combo engine that can end on dangerous dragon boss monsters like Borreload Savage Dragon or Borrelen Dragon, as well as have solid generic link and synchro tools to access other boss monsters like Axis Kotaker or Baronne de Fleur. Dragon Link as a deck and concept has been around for years. It's easily the oldest deck on this list, and that's largely because of the ship of thesis nature of the deck. The deck might lose old dragon cards, either getting banned or fall off in power level, but then Konami inevitably releases some new dragon monsters that fit right into the deck anyhow. In recent memory, that was obviously the Bestials, releasing at the tail end of 2022. These cards are combination hand trap, big bodies, and oftentimes field disruption like with Baldrake and Druiswarm. Dragon Link got another surge of life from these cards to extend its relevance. These play well with the already chaos-heavy engine of Dragon Link, and their 6-star line pairs perfectly with core Dragon Link monsters like Rocket Tracer to give the deck easy Baronne access if it didn't have it before. Being good going first extenders and generally powerful going second hand traps have made Bestials a popular choice in a variety of decks, but they're now a core aspect of how Dragon Link functions. That said, in the regular TCG metagame, this has been a relatively down year for Dragon Link. Despite being available for the entirety of the year, it doesn't have as many tops as Rescue Ace, and its best showing at the YCS level is being only one of the 3 decks in the 3v3 YCS San Paulo winning trio, and it has no wins at the National or Continental WCQ level, and it's below most of the decks on this list for overall top cut appearances. So why is it ranked all the way up at number 5? Well, this year marked the return of the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship, and with it came the unusual World Championship format with a combined TCG and OCG ban list and an adjusted card pool, where certain region-exclusive archetypes weren't legal, because they weren't available in both formats. It also meant that the ban list of the OCG, which had access to significantly more cards than the TCG, was functionally further ahead and took out many of the viable TCG decks from contention. And that's where Dragon Link snuck its way into the competition. While Dragon Link did lose a few Bestial copies to adjusted Forbidden and Limited lists, it survived the new format largely intact, and took 2 of the top 4 spots at Worlds, including winning the entire tournament. While World Championship is a unique microcosm and a format upon itself, it's impossible to look at the deck that won the most important tournament in Yu-Gi-Oh! And not give it a place on this list. So, despite a down year in the TCG, Dragon Link is a World Championship deck and earns itself a place on this list for that all on its own. And breaking into the number 4 spot on this list, we have Unchained. This is a Link and Fiend-based archetype whose primary strategy is accruing value off of your own cards, getting destroyed, and floating into different effects. Unchained, while not old, isn't really a new archetype. Its first batch of cards debuted in early 2020, and the deck spent the intervening 3 years as never more than a neat rogue option. While it could set up powerful interactions, such as Unchained Soul of Rage's relatively unique effect to remove a special summon monster from your opponent's field by linking it off, the entire concept of getting value off of your own cards being destroyed didn't really have the flexibility or power to compete with top decks at the time. The core cards of the main deck, the Unchained Twins, formed a decent resource loop summoning each other from the deck, resetting good trap cards like Escape the Unchained, the Abominable Chamber of the Unchained, and could even set up some decent boss monsters like Abominable Unchained Soul or Unchained Abomination, who could further net you interaction and value off of your destruction effects. But decent wasn't really good enough, as the deck was fairly obvious in its play pattern and didn't have a very high power level, and wasn't particularly resilient when setting up or trying to break the board. That all changed with the July release of a bunch of new legacy support for Unchained and Duelist Nexus. Suddenly, the deck had access to a great semi-generic Link 2 in Unchained Soul Lord of Yama. This card did nearly everything for the archetype, immediately getting you into your Unchained monsters when special summoned, and having a great graveyard effect to give you a free special summon by banishing itself if another card you control is destroyed, something Unchained was already going to do. Its pseudo-generic nature of only needing 2 fiends to link summon let Unchained run cards like Tour Guide from the Underworld to more easily access the Unchained engine, while also setting up a rank 3 for cards like DD Stone King Darius as a powerful Zeus enabler, and access to DDD Deviser King Des Machinax. If that doesn't sound good enough, this bombshell card was also accompanied by 2 new great main deck monsters, Unchained Soul of Shayama and Unchained Soul of Shavara. Shayama is typically a card that's only run as a single copy as a searchable back row removal, and solid extension in recovery out of the graveyard, but is important as a searchable and summonable level 6. Shavara, on the other hand, gave the deck a quick effect to destroy your own cards to help the deck's important monster effect dodge cards like Infinite Impermanence, while also being level 6 to set up a powerful rank 6 play in DD Wave King High Caesar as a negation for any effect that special summons monsters. Shavara's graveyard effect is similarly great, setting the Unchained traps directly to the field, giving the deck incidental access to those tools through its normal combo. These new cards gave the deck a huge power level consistency and resilience boost that it was missing from before, immediately sending it into top metagame contention. It was the last of the 3 decks in the 3v3 San Paulo Team YCS and won 2 individual YCSs in Vancouver and Richmond. It still released too late to make an impact on the WCQ season and was too new to be used at the World Championship itself, but very few decks have won multiple YCSs in a year, and Unchained has over 50 significant top cut finishes in just YCSs. A pretty staggering amount, showing just how big a deal it's been in the game since its new wave of support. One of the best decks of the year, and still one of the best decks going into 2024. And at number 3 in this list, we have another returning deck with Spright. This is a deck built around various level 2 monsters, comboing to access extenders like Gigantic Spright or Spright Sprint, and built-in main deck interaction tools like Spright Red, Spright Carrot, and even some non-monster interactions off of Spright Smashers or Spright Double Cross. Spright Blue and Gigantic Spright can access main deck Spright monsters, and Spright Jet can access the Spright spells and traps, including the deck's archetypal emergency teleport imitator in Spright Starter. And every main deck Spright monster has the inherent ability to special summon themselves if you control a level or rank 2 monster. Spright is one of the best archetypes of all time. It's loaded with tons of redundancy, the ability to extend through hand traps, and the power to put up multiple interactions with minimal investment, all while maintaining tons of follow-up. Spright's legendary for its ability to weave in any engine that can provide level 2 monsters, with the most popular being the aforementioned Runicks, the Frog Engine, Live Twins, Melfies, and the Nimble monsters. All of these engines can special summon out level 2 monsters one way or another, letting the Sprights swarm the board to get their effects. Sprights was, aptly, our number 2 deck last year, and it carried a lot of momentum into 2023. This is in spite of the fact the deck has received numerous hits on the ban list since its debut in 2022. Spright L, for example, has been banned, both for its use in Spright and its generic use in other decks, and it even got the Swap Frog engine gutted with the banning of Ronin Totem. Even the deck's most versatile main deck card, Spright Starter, received a semi-limitation. In spite of all of these hits, Spright has still had a huge impact in 2023. It won the 2nd YCS of the year, the Remote Dual Latin America YCS, still in the height of the then Tier 0 Ishizu Tearlament format by teching into Bestials and extremely anti-Tearlament hate like Dimension Shifter and Dimensional Barrier. But even as Tearlament's Tier 0 days waned, Spright remained a relevant part of the metagame throughout the entire year, winning YCS Lima as well as winning the biggest YCS ever, YCS London. Arguably the toughest tournament of all time to win due to the huge player pool. It was also around early enough to participate in WCQ season, winning 2 national WCQs in Greece and Ireland, as well as the already mentioned Central America YCS with a Runick variant. Despite being around so long, Spright is usually just decently competitive, but not too heavily represented in the metagame throughout the year. It has a similar number of top cut performances to Unchained, despite having a half a year head start over, but this list is about the entirety of 2023. And Spright shouldn't have had its big WCQ wins held against it. Spright is just one of those decks that's too good and consistent at everything it's trying to do. So long as the core engine of Spright cards is around, even with Elf banned, it's a powerful deck and an important metagame contender. While decks like Rescue Ace and Unchained might surpass it as we make our way into 2024, 2023 was still a big year for Spright as one of the best decks. And at number 2 in this list, we have Tearlaments. More specifically, Ishizu Tearlaments. Tearlaments was the well-deserved winner of our 2022 top decks, ushering in the first Tier 0 format since 2017 at the end of 2022, and it carried that dominance into 2023. Tearlaments is a strategy that relies on milling as many cards from their own deck as possible to fill up the graveyard and trigger the graveyard effects of the various Tearlament monsters to fuse out of the graveyard into powerful boss monsters, as well as trigger the effects of their spells and traps for more value, like how Tearlament Celia can search a Tearlament's monster when it's sent to the graveyard. The deck combines this with the Ishizu monsters, who either mill you for 5 cards further with a Guido and Kelbeck, or to get graveyard interaction out of Mudora and Keldo. On a good mill, Tearlaments put out powerful boss monsters, searched cards, and set up staggering forms of interaction with good back row options and engine cards that worked as hand traps like Kelbeck and Havness. Famously, the most oppressive thing about Tearlaments was that after it comboed off on its own turn, the entire engine worked to recycle and redo these combos over and over on your opponent's turn too. This deck had a near stranglehold during the first couple of months of 2023, winning YCS Sydney, YCS Lyon, and being the deck of choice for all 3 decks in the 3v3 YCS Mexico City. As you might expect, the Tier 0 nature of Tearlaments incurred some incredibly harsh hits on the Forbidden Limitless, banning the critical Tearlaments Kit Kalos, limiting every Ishizu monster to 1, and limiting each of Havness, Merely, and Shyren to 1, leaving only Tearlaments Rhinoheart of the Tier 0 era main deck monsters at 3. The funny thing is that, despite these enormous hits to the deck, it was still playable, with some unusual tech options to replace Kit Kalos as a fusion material, cards like King of the Swamp being the fusion material used to substitute Kit Kalos when making Rukalos, and even giving the deck access to new powerful fusion monsters like Rafa, Dragon Overlord of Dark World. And it wasn't all bad news, as partway through the year, the deck got a bit of incidental support with Kashtira Tearlaments, a dual archetype monster that had 2 separate effects to mill cards, something Tier was in dire need of with Kit Kalos banned. The deck remained nominally playable despite the hits, even winning the Continental level WCQ in South Korea in its heavily limited state. And while that is in the OCG, the deck has continued to be one of the most represented decks in tops cuts throughout the years in the TCG, racking up over 110 topping performances in major tournaments, an absolutely enormous amount of tops that dwarfs every other deck mentioned so far on this list. This number alone is staggering, and while plenty of those appearances come from earlier this year where Tier was still at its height, as recently as the most YCS, you are still seeing Tearlament decks taking top spots in tourneys. Frankly, if it wasn't for the sudden dominance of a new deck in the middle of the year that specifically countered Tearlaments, we might be talking about Tearlaments as the repeat best deck of the year. And speaking of that hard counter, taking the number 1 spot on this list, we have Kashtira. Undoubtedly the best deck of the year, Kashtira took Yu-Gi-Oh! By storm with the release of their big boss monster, Kashtira Riseheart, in February, and never looked back. Kashtira is a rank 7 based archetype centered around locking zones with Kashtira Shangri Ra and banishing cards, most often face down. But that doesn't really do it justice. What makes Kashtira so powerful is just how much versatility and power is attached to those cards individually. Kashtira Fenrir is famous for being so good that every deck in the format can justify running it on its own, as the Kashtira ability to special summon itself if you control no monsters makes it an easy opening play. It can even search itself as well as any other Kashtira monsters, so you can plus even if you're only running Fenrir. And it has an insane ability to banish a face-up card your opponent controls whenever it attacks or your opponent activates an effect, giving it double duty as a piece of interaction or as a board breaker. But Fenrir might not even be the best main deck Kashtira monster, as Kashtira Unicorn gives the deck a 1-card combo without even committing to a normal summon thanks to its ability to search out Kashtira Theosis, the deck's own version of Emergency Teleport, so long as you control a Kashtira monster. Unicorn also came equipped with a disruption that triggered just like Fenrir, but can instead strip monsters out of your opponent's extra deck and banish them face down. Not quite as powerful as Fenrir, but dangerous, and its presence really affected extra deck compositions. With Kashtira roaming the format, you couldn't get away with running a single critical monster, as one Unicorn stalking the field might collapse your entire strategy. This setup all funneled into the most impactful monster of 2023, Kashtira Riseheart. This format-defining boss monster came equipped with a Macrocosmos style effect that banished any card that would go to the graveyard, and when any card got banished, it could refuel its own materials by attaching a banished card to itself as a material. If that wasn't enough, it had a quick effect to banish any card in the field face down, a grossly powerful interaction that was often enough to win games on its own. These effects are what really took Tearlaments out of the metagame for months, and all of this banishing face down even allowed Kashtira to turn into an insane win combo deck that paired well with the previously innocuous number 89, Diabolus the Mind Hacker. Its ability to banish cards from your opponent's deck whenever an opponent's card was banished face down created a sort of feedback loop with the Kashtira monsters, triggering Shangri-Ra's zone lock multiple times and potentially being able to lock out every spell and monster zone your opponent controls. This setup functionally prevented them from summoning any monsters or playing any spells or traps. If all of this sounds too good or too powerful to you, then you're right, as both Diabolus and Kashtira Riseheart earned themselves a place at the ban list during Kashtira's reign. Though Diabolus was banned earlier on in Kashtira's lifespan, the deck continued to be dominant on its own strengths in spite of that. Overall, Kashtira took home a staggering 5 YCS wins at Bogota, Los Angeles, Santiago, Philadelphia, and being all 3 winning decks in the 3v3 YCS at Las Vegas. Considering the next best deck only had 3 YCS wins with Tearlaments, that's a powerful gap. And not to settle for just that, Kashtira ran amok during the WCQ season, winning 13 different nationals and a mind-boggling 4 continental WCQs. I'd list each region, but it's just too many accomplishments to name. And speaking of too many, Kashtira had over 190 verified major top cut performances of the year, which is a baffling amount. The difference between Kashtira's number of top performances and Tearlaments is more tops than any other deck has had throughout the entire year, and Kashtira was really only a deck for 6 months out of the year. The only thing Kashtira didn't do in 2023 was claim the vaunted status of being a Tier 0 deck. But outside of that, it was clearly the best deck of the year in 2023, earning it the #1 spot by a landslide. Alright, and that's the list. Are there any other decks or archetypes you think should have made on this list? Or are there any other topics like this you think we should cover next? If so, let us know down in the comments below.